All right, guys. So a couple days ago, it was supposed to be a 60-kilometer run, and I had to modify it. So it's hypoxic with a mask, and I was getting through a lot of complications. And I understand why, and I'm gonna go over that in a second here. But before I start with that, I want to say that the run that I was doing was inspired actually by Brad McLeod, who is doing a bike ride 350 kilometers for the Navy SEAL Foundation for wounded veterans. And yeah, so I decided to do a 60-kilometer hypoxic run with a mask. And also due to the air quality, that's one of the reasons for the mask. Initially, it was actually just supposed to be with boots, so I ended up doing it with a mask. And yeah, so it was to build awareness and just raise money and raise some funds, again, for wounded veterans. So the link to the charity is on there, on this video here, or below somewhere here. All right, so check it out. Contribute anything, everything counts. And yeah, if you like the efforts, if you like the cause, contribute anything, even a small amount, everything counts. All right, so let's talk about energy systems. Okay, so if you watch the video, I broke it up. I'm still editing the videos, but I have one part up already. So anyways, I start running, and I was fasted from the night before. So my last meal was probably at 6 o'clock the night before. So I haven't eaten anything, and I started my run, and about 2 hours in, I haven't had anything to eat, and I had a glass of water to drink. So that really set things up for a disaster. But I'm going to explain why. Okay, so there's energy systems. Okay, so there's aerobic, anaerobic. So there's two. So one is using oxygen, and the other one is not using oxygen. And there's kind of one in between where it's, for instance, if you're doing sprints or you're lifting heavy, right? So that one's kind of in the middle, right? So which will use ATP and stuff like that. But we will get into that. Okay, and anaerobic would be like if you're swimming underwater and there's no oxygen available. So these are the two. So when you're talking about aerobic exercise for cardiovascular, this is what people are talking about. Aerobic exercise, you're using oxygen. So you're working out, and you're going for a run, and you're breathing. A lot of heavy breathing, so you're breathing it in, you're using that energy source, okay? So in this one, in that case, you're not using oxygen. Again, for instance, if you're swimming underwater, you won't be able to breathe in that oxygen, so your body has to switch its energy source. Okay, so I would be kind of in the middle, because when I was doing the hypoxic run, I was wearing an N95 mask, and how much oxygen I would be able to take in is restricted. Okay, so that's one thing that hindered my ability to did I bring my marker? That one's dried. Okay, right there, right back. Okay, so aerobic again. So what I was doing, I had the hypoxic mask on. No, it wasn't a hypoxic mask, sorry. It was an N95 mask. So it's something that, like that you'd wear. I worked at the hospital, so you'd wear that if you're working with like an airborne patient or something like that. So you'd wear this mask. So that's what I was wearing. There was air pollution. The real reason I was wearing that mask is because there was a forest fire, one province down, and we couldn't see the sun for like a couple weeks, and the air quality was really bad. So initially I was supposed to just run in boots, but I added the mask just because of the air quality. I thought it'd be a nice challenge for me anyways, and so that's what I did. So I kind of was in the middle, where I'd use a little bit of oxygen, but how much I could intake was restricted. Okay, so oxygen, and then glucose would be a form of sugar that's in the body. Okay, so your body uses sugar, so a lot of times, bodybuilders will, let's say they'll consume some sugar before they go and do a workout to flush the carbohydrates into the muscles, right? And they're going to use that carbohydrates during the workout, and it's going to fill out the muscles, because your muscles actually store glycogen, right? So glucose, and then when you use that you begin to burn through that stored glycogen in your muscle, and that's glucose, right? So this is good for strength training. you know, again, sprints and stuff like that. Actually, a lot of endurance athletes will do a carb load. So they'll carb deplete and then carb load. So the body stores a lot more glucose in their body for the event day. So this was my first error. Okay, so first of all, I'm restricting oxygen. So my body has to use glucose. But when you're fasting, after 10 hours, your body is practically depleted of glucose. And then you start getting into ketosis. Okay, so I have no glucose in my body. I'm not keto adapted, so my body can't tap into fats, which is down here. Okay, so I don't have any glucose, right? So my body is gonna have to start breaking down because it doesn't have the oxygen. It needs the glucose, but I didn't have any. So it has to take a longer path to actually break down fats or protein. I think it's I before E or E before I, whatever. Okay, so anyways, my body needs to break down fats, needs to break down fat or protein, which is going to be a longer process. Okay, so it also has to produce ATP, because if you don't have oxygen, your body relies on ATP. Again, it often breaks down glucose to attain ATP. Okay, so again, I don't have glucose, so I have to take the long route and gather ATP from fat and protein. Right, so it's got to break that down. So, and without breathing the amount of oxygen that I would like, that the body would like, it can't get to this fast enough. So when it starts tapping into primarily ATP, it leaves a byproduct in your muscles. So it builds up this lactic acid, right? And I'm not able to clear it out as fast, again, because of the lack of oxygen. So it starts to build up, and when there's too much lactic acid, that burn, you know, when you're working out, you feel that burn in your muscle. So when there's too much buildup of that, your muscles actually begin to reach point of failure. So it stops functioning, right? So I set myself, because I didn't have any glucose from fasting. I'm not keto adapted. Okay, I didn't have a high amount of oxygen, which is interesting because when I started to take the mask off, I started to recover faster. But because there's a repaying of ATP, so what happens is when the body requires you to tap into ATP, there's almost like a repaying that has to happen. So it's almost like a debt, okay? So I've already accumulated so much of the debt in my body that it doesn't clear out that lactic acid fast enough, especially when I'm continuing, you know, exertion. Okay, so that's ATP. ATP is required when using this, okay? So that's a reason for failure. So let's talk about fat. If you're keto adapted, your body would break down fats, turn it into ketones, okay? Which I'm not keto adapted. Ketones, okay. Ketones is a form of carbohydrates, kind of glucose. So if you are keto adapted, your body will use ketones to create ATP and fuel the body. This is why they say for endurance athletes, being keto adapted works really good for endurance athletes. Why? So when you're doing aerobic, you might be thinking, okay, ATP, isn't endurance aerobic? That's right, okay? But for the aerobic athlete, they're using fats, primarily fats. Okay, because when you're using a low intensity, you're using somewhere between fat and glucose, and when you're keto adapted, you'll have fats and glucose all in one package. So for endurance athletes, being keto adapted is the best place to be. So if you're a sprinter, powerlifter, strength, glucose and ATP is the best. Okay, so protein, your body wants to tap into the last, and we almost never want to tap into protein if we can avoid it. So, so yeah, but this is usually your last resort. Your body has so much uses with protein, has so many functions in your body, it doesn't really want to tap into protein either. So if you're fasting, if you're, you know, if you're not even putting that much protein in, it's going to tap into other things first. If you set it up properly, you can set it up so that your body doesn't tap into that protein. So yeah, so that's the different energy systems. Your body uses primarily fat as a fuel. So when you're resting, sitting, sleeping, walking, your body's using fats. and you're thinking, okay, I'm going to get a little bit further into the energy systems here, into fat loss, okay? So you're probably thinking, okay, well, if my body always uses fats, you know, why is it so hard to lose fat? Okay, because fat is an unlimited source, right? If your fat cells are full, it'll create more fat cells. And you can never outwork your fat stores. You can never, if you go on a treadmill and look at how many calories you burn and how many calories per fat, you'll never outrun the amount of fat that you're storing. So it's never a good idea to lose fat by attacking fat. What's usually blocking the release of fat is insulin. So you want to be attacking glucose. This is why a lot of times people will tell you you need to do strength training and stuff to lose fat. That's the reason. You want to deplete that glucose, and then your body will naturally tap into more fats. Okay, so you remember when I said there's a repaying of energy when you're using ATP. So when you're actually depleting glucose and using ATP, there's what they call the afterburn. What's up, bud? Okay, I'll get right to you. Okay, buddy? What? Let me finish this. Okay, so there's the afterburn. Your body has to repay that, and that's where your body will burn fat for days. Okay, so that long run that I did the other day, I'm probably still repaying it for it right now. So that's an advantage, right, of tapping into glucose and ATP. So when you're training, you can probably start seeing it now. You can strengthen the use of these energy sources. So you can train your body to be able to be more effective at using these sources. So depending on what your sport is, again, going to programming, if you're looking at a program to see if it fits, you know, your needs, you can also consider what energy source is this tapping into. So you can, and whatever your sport, if you're a sprinter, well, which one are you going to use? And then you can start developing that source. If you're a bodybuilder, or if you're a endurance athlete, you know, long distance athlete, what energy source will you be using, and what energy source do you want to keep developing? Okay, so these are different energy sources. So you got aerobic, which is oxygen. Oh yes, and oxygen is required to break down all of these primarily. So oxygen will break down glucose. Oxygen is required to produce ATP, and you oxidize fat with oxygen too, so oxygen is very important. Okay, but if you want to focus heavily on ATP, again, you can restrict oxygen intake. Okay, so yeah, so aerobic, oxygen. Without oxygen, oxygen oxidizes fat, glucose is sugar, bread, carbs, stuff like that. You can carb load if it's strategic though. You can't just carb load by eating carbs. There's a way to do it. I'm not going to get into that right now. And then ATP is mostly burst, short durations, strength, no oxygen, ATP. Fat is what you use all the time. Protein is kind of last resort. So that's it. That's energy systems. Hopefully that helps you guys out. Considering your programs, your training, whatever it is. I mean, this gets into a lot more science and a lot more complex, but I don't want to get too much into science. Hopefully that was kind of layman enough so that a beginner can understand it, right? Okay, so there you go, energy systems. All right, so check out that charity, guys. All right, see you later.